And welcome back in. I'll go ahead, pull up a chair, sit around this round table we've got here, where we are all things redraft, fantasy football, and Grant joining me around the table again. Once again, I love it. How are we doing after 1 week and started the second week now? We have a little scheduling, but a little delayed, but
hmm
on to now week two. But how are we doing after week one, fantasy football wise?
Yeah, I think overall, it was a good week. It was a low passing week overall for the NFL, which, of course, with fantasy directly correlates to a lot of lower scores that we saw between receivers and quarterbacks. But yeah, I mean, there was definitely some news, definitely some overreactions, some injuries that we could talk about and like really get into before we start week two here.
Yep, I think let's overreact a little bit to week one, but while we overreact, let's also remember we had a whole off season of building up what we
hmm
thought was going to look like, and now either we've had confirmation bias because the players we wanted, we loved, obviously they're
hmm
doing great. They did awesome. So if you had Saquon Barkley, you trusted him. Obviously, after week one, you're a
Yep.
genius for having that. But if not, then yeah, let's overreact to some bad things. So Grant, let's take it away. We'll call it our weekly 6 pack or 4 pack of overreaction
Yep.
news items from each week. And what's your overreaction first item for this week we've got?
I think my overreaction this week is sell all your tight ends you drafted and go to the waivers because that's that's kind of what happened the last week. I think Sam Laporta was the only tight end in the top drafted top 10 that had a top 10 performance. You saw a
Yep.
lot of 4, 5, 6, 7 point matchups that from like Travis Kelsey's, George Kittle's, Dalton Kincaid's. So, it's trying to process that. And the reaction is, a lot of fantasy owners are like, what in the world's going on? Isaiah Likely, the Ravens' number two tight end that we've seen in a couple different seasons, who has taken from Mark Andrews when he's been hurt, and that the Ravens often use in their two tight end sets. He came and had a great day versus the Chiefs
Yep.
and really balled out and was probably a high waiver claim for a lot of different leagues this last year. This last week. So yeah, I mean, Jeff, what are you thinking? Like, I mean, with tight end, it was a barren landscape with tight ends this year. Typically, you either went waivers or super discounted, or you went one of the premier receivers. So, like, how are you gauging the tight end landscape? What are you looking forward in week two?
If I have my say, I am texting my league commissioner and saying we need to change that position to a flex, do away with the tight end position in
Mm.
fantasy football. It doesn't matter. This is not real football. We are doing away with it. So that is what I would say. You text every commissioner that you have and just say, turn that position into a flex and keep it tight end eligible just for those purists that want it. No, on a more serious note, though, um, what I'm doing, I mean, it's hard not to overreact because this year it
Yeah.
seemed tight
Yeah.
end was pretty deep. You could go all the way down
hmm
to potentially, David Njoku, Jake Ferguson. You could get pretty deep in a draft and still feel pretty confident about your tight end position. And um,
hmm
I think the biggest thing, if I'm looking at it, is I want to look at not the numbers that they produced, but I think there's a few things going on here, and I heard some more other people talk about this on other podcasts, and they're a lot smarter than I am. But they were saying that offensive production is still at a lower than what we anticipate it to be for the week one of this year. So, like in 2020, 2021, we see this surge of offensive production, and since then, it's kind of gone down and we're expecting it to
hmm
come back up, but it hasn't. And I think with that, that correlates to the tight end position because they're not typically a first read. Now, Travis Kelsey being kind of that outlier of he has been. So from that
hmm
aspect, there are other things to look at where they obviously have Rashi Rice, they have younger playmakers where they don't need him to be. So I'm holding pat, basically. I'm holding tight with who I
Okay.
drafted, saying, I'm going to ride this out a little bit because the entire position was garbage essentially. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not like, oh, two out of the top 10 didn't perform but everybody else did. So if you pick those two, you're then going waiver wire hunting. Now, if you drafted David Njoku, and I did in our league, and I didn't get Isaiah Likely because I did not overbid my fab on him. I thought I bid the right amount, but obviously not. Um, you're waiver wire hunting. You're taking the injury with your tight end, saying I'll hold and I'll wait. That's kind of my thought. Do you agree, disagree? What do you kind of think on? I think it's more than just a simple way it didn't produce and why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what you're doing is the problem is in a lot of leagues, tight end, there's just not a lot of high quality tight ends, and you're right. Probably in I say purist way, you keep the tight end position, right? But from
Right.
a usable position perspective, I think that most leagues would do better with it being given away, give you more parity in the league. But it is what it is. So
Yeah.
I think with the tight end position, I think what you're doing is if you have a tight end that you drafted well, like that, I think what you're doing is you're looking at percentages, right? So, for example, like
Yeah.
Dalton Kincaid, week one, um, Bill score a ton of points, right? Dalton Kincaid has like 4 point something fantasy points or something like that, right? So you're looking at his snap percentage at 84 snap share, which was great. That beat Dawson Knox. Overall, that's great. And so I think what you're looking at is if you're tight end perform, look at usage. That also applies to receivers, running backs, etc.
Yep.
Same we could talk about like Zamir White or Alexander Madison, right? Like that combination. A lot of people put in high waiver wire either bids or burn their priority on Madison. I'm not 100% sure set on him just because of he rushed the ball 5 times and had a touchdown that kind of salvaged a fantasy day.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so I think what you're looking for is like just hold steady, look at snap counts. There were very few tight ends that did well. And I think you need to wait at least 3 or 4 weeks before you make a decision, like moving. Obviously, if there's tight ends on the waiver wire that are available, go ahead and grab them to just kind of have like an insurance policy if you think that yours is not going well, or you have an injury, of course. But in general, I think that it's wise to not panic, especially at one position where your opponent is also probably scoring 7 points if you're scoring five.
Right. And that's a good point, is looking across the opponent saying, did my tight end severely underperform according to what the
Mm-hmm.
league average is at that position? I
Yeah.
will say, if you, so like me, if you drafted somebody like David Njoku, or if you have a Jake Ferguson where they're going to be out for a few weeks, and you were not one of the
Mm-hmm.
lucky ones that put in the correct amount or didn't have the number one waiver claim for Isaiah Likely this week, there are, like you said, there are usable tight ends on the waiver wire. I think one of my favorite this week is who I actually picked up in our league is Colby Parkinson with the Rams. Part of
Mm-hmm.
that is Puka is out. He's on IR. So you have a few weeks, I think, of serviceable usage. He actually ran, going to your point of looking at snap counts, he ran I think a top five route percentage for the position this past week
Great.
against the Lions. So he didn't get the targets like that we would have wanted, but he had some of the peripherals of stats that we would say, okay, Nakua's out. There's open
Yep.
position. Yes, a waiver targets are also, Demarcus Robinson, or there's other, wide receivers there, but Parkinson was already running those routes. So I think that's
Yeah.
one where you just,
Exactly.
yeah, go to the waiver wire, pick him up, stream him for a few weeks. If it doesn't work out, the beauty of streaming is there's going to be more people
Yeah.
next week according to the matchup. So that's what I would
Yeah.
say. I think Parkinson is a good one if he's out there, which he's been out there for a few leagues. go pick him up, stream him this week. That would be my recommendation, at least
Mhm.
for 1 week.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of want to like really emphasize is with tight end, the beauty of the position compared to receiver in a
Mm,
PPR league or maybe even a quarterback in a super flex is that if your player does not perform well, unless you're up against a premier top two, like a Kelsey or something, where the usage is just really insane, the even if your tight end's injured or doesn't have a good usage, you're overall not going to be that far behind points wise with your position, which is
right.
something to think about. And like, yes, it sucks to like, man, my tight end got 5 points, right? But look at your opponents. My opponent's got 8, right? Well, guess what? 3 points difference in fantasy matchup is really nothing when, especially if you have a lot of capital into receivers or running backs that you chose instead of that tight end. So
Yeah.
again, it's easy to overreact. Week one's a good time to grab players before they
Yep.
really start developing a trend, right? Of high points where you can grab them before they really become like a household name, and you're able to like get a good value for them off the waiver. But yes, I think that it's important not to freak out. It's important to look at these players and understand like what exactly is going on, what the situation is. Like you said, look at snap counts and look at other things that are going to help you make a good decision.
Yeah. So, real quick, we've hit on kind of the tight end position as a whole, but let's go back to that game last Thursday, so a week ago, and it's kind of been said at nauseum by a lot of people in the fantasy football industry, but like Mark Andrews typically hasn't done well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to use Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely. I kind of want to get some thoughts on this from your perspective, but typically the past 5 times that Baltimore's faced Steve Spagnuolo and the Chiefs defense, he has not performed well. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
trend there that the Chiefs defense, Steve Spagnuolo, knows how to take Mark Andrews out of the game plan for Baltimore. Um, so is Isaiah Likely then? Is he a product of 1 week where we saw Andrews double covered, bracketed pretty much the entire night? Is that 1 week, or is this a the overreaction? I think is Isaiah Likely is taking the guard over. He is the tight end one now in
Mm-hmm.
Baltimore. Is that more where it's at, or is it a this was kind of game dependent, but also could lead to kind of a we see a more tight end, two tight end ones potentially on the same team. What are your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts on that situation with going forward?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I think that I think it's a mix of both. I mean, I
Mm,
think why everybody was panicking a little bit is scarcity of position. And when I
mm,
say panicking, I mean why you're trying to grab Likely off the waiver wire was a little bit of the scarcity of like if hey if this person gets 22 points game one, then maybe I get 22 points game 2 and 3, right? Like there's
right,
that
right.
that little FOMO factor that you're doing, but at the same time, you're also seeing a established elite quarterback have repertoire with another person other than Mark Andrews, which is good for
Mm,
both
yep,
injury. If something happens with Mark Andrews and he doesn't really have an injury history, but last year he was out a few games and likely
yep,
came in and did a great job. So that combination of all those things, a high score against the Chiefs that are now a big household name with this great defense they have and all these different factors, and he scored well, and I think some of that was obviously really locking down Mark Andrews and forcing them to go to Likely as the backup option. So, but yeah, I think it's a mix of both. I think it's a little overreaction to say that Likely is going to take over the guard. I think Mark Andrews is still a very good tight
mm,
end, and we might see teams later back that off and go more on like the Zay Flowers route where they're really trying to bottle him up, and then all of a sudden you see this double tight end attack. So
yeah,
to me, if you're in a league that's somewhat competitive, people probably have grabbed him just because of his point value. But if you were able to grab him, I think you just stash him on your bench, kind of see the next few weeks how things are going. But I mean, I think if you have a tight end problem or situation, not the worst idea to spend a little bit of fab on him or your waiver priority to pick him up.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I mean, I think if this would be the duo, the combination, because they ran more 12 personnel with two tight ends on the field at a higher rate than Baltimore has in a very long
Mm,
time. So if there is a team that this hasn't been done since the early Patriots era, where there were two tight ends that
mm,
finished in the top 10 fantasy wise, um, this could be the team that has that. So I think that is definitely a
mm-hmm.
possibility where
Yep.
Andrews can still finish as a potential tight end one. Maybe not top five, but there's definitely tight end one potential for both of them. So I agree. If for
Mm-hmm.
some reason, if Isaiah Likely is still out on your waivers, you need to go get him now. Don't let your league mates get him
Mm-hmm.
just because there's that potential, like you said. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yep.
So what let's bring up, I want to kind of bring up a two for here for things we saw in week one, kind of a two for one. I want to look at, let's talk through some teams that have some veteran quarterbacks that kind of have some question marks after week one,
Mm.
but then let's compare that to, or contrast if we want, to the teams that have highly touted rookie quarterbacks. And where are we concerned after 1 week? And again, 1 week. So a little bit overreaction. But the famous words of Aaron Rodgers, we all also need to do a little RELAX, relax. It's fine. Take a chill pill. But um, so let's look at. I got three teams here. Veteran quarterbacks didn't do so hot that we all kind of expected to kind of hit the ground running, and
Mm.
there are probably some more that we could hit on if we wanted to. But the Browns are one. I think they're a big glowing red flag of concern there. Atlanta being another one, Kirk Cousins. Um, and then the third one that I'm probably gonna say here, uh, coming out the top of my head. Yeah, well, let's just look at those two real quick though. Because I want to kind of dive a little deeper on Cleveland. I think there's a lot to uncover there, and I'm how concerned are we specifically for these two
Mm.
teams, but other ones that kind of had some bad QB performances that aren't rookies. What's our level of concern here for these teams?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I mean, I'll probably start with the Falcons and let you do the
Okay.
Browns, but I think for the Falcons, like you've definitely drafted Drake London in most likely the second round based upon Kirk Cousins connecting with him like he did with Justin Jefferson, right?
Yep.
That's what you drafted him as, or Drake London as. The Falcons paid Kirk Cousins to come in, and man, he looked shaky. It wasn't good. Overall with that game, the Falcons were pretty underwhelming. We did see Bijan get decent usage
Yep.
out of the backfield, but I mean, in terms of the quarterback play, it was not good. But overall, like taking sacks, throwing interceptions, it wasn't pretty. Again, I think that we expected the veteran quarterback to come in almost like a Tom Brady with Tampa situation, right? Where it's
Mm-hmm.
like he comes in and then just, basically injects the offense with this lifeblood that allows them to just move to the next level. I did like seeing the usage from Bijan. I like seeing that
Yep.
with the Falcons offense, but I think Kirk Cousins just got to get used to a new system. And I know it seems super cliche to say, but at the same time, it's like this is his first real game with real contact with these people. He's been, I mean, with Washington, with the Vikings for a stint for a long time, for these teams, and he's used to them, used to the receivers. I think if you've got Drake London, you've got to keep playing him, right? Like you can't. I don't think you can realistically bench Drake London unless you're in some kind of weird 8-man league where you have options coming out of your sleeves, and you could do that. But yeah, I mean, I think if you're if you have Falcons players minus Bijan, right? So if you've got especially Drake London, I think you need to be a little concerned. I think you do because like right now, you drafted him based upon a consistent, somewhat safe second round pick with a veteran quarterback. You're not getting that production week one.
Yeah, and again, week one, I think it's good to be a little concerned to be aware. Kirk Cousins didn't look like he could move a yard out of the pocket, so that's I think
Mm-hmm.
my biggest concern is he did not look mobile. Now the
No.
saving grace I will say for the Falcons is if Cousins really can't keep going, they bring in Michael Penix and see what they have with the rookie that they drafted. So there is at least
Yep.
a potential lifeline if you have Drake London and you're hoping for something more. I think there's a possibility if the Falcons, who many touted to say we're going to win the division, um,
Mm-hmm.
are looking bad. That's
Yep.
kind of they're playing for their career. The coaches are playing for their jobs still. Like I know it's a new
Yep.
staff. I get it's a new staff, but you don't you don't want to enter that of disappointment of that level on your year one. That's really
No.
not
No.
a good. Now we can also say it wasn't fair for us to have that high of expectation for them entering year one, but it is what it is at this point. So you're
Mm-hmm.
not gonna, you're not gonna be able to change that. So I'll switch over to Cleveland. I think this is a little bit bigger of a red flag and bigger of alarm bells going off. Um, you could also say the same in different ways about the Giants, where they still have they chose Daniel Jones as quarterback, and he did not look good Sunday. So that'd be another team. I think there's a level of concern, but there were not as many highly drafted fantasy players from the Giants. We all kind of saw what they were. Some that were possibly that you're hopefully not relying on as a high player was like Malik Neighbors, or if you went with the late running back, it's Devin
Mm-hmm.
Singletary. But other than that, I don't think people are too concerned about the Giants. But switching back to the Browns, I get they're playing Dallas, but the Browns made Dallas look like Super Bowl contenders, and Dallas might
Mm-hmm.
be.
Yep.
Dallas very well might be. Um, I tend to kind of probably dog too much on the Cowboys, so I don't think they're actual Super Bowl contenders. They're a good team, but I don't think they're that good. Um, am I wrong for how I see that? Where I'm very concerned, and I'll kind of break down what my thoughts are on this. I think Deshaun Watson is not right for the Kevin Stefanski system in Cleveland. And I heard somebody on a podcast this week breaking down the comparison between week one and then last
Mm-hmm.
year and what they
Mm-hmm.
ran. And under Deshaun Watson with Kevin Stefanski, they ran more 11 personnel, so one tight end, three wide receivers, one running back, because that's what Deshaun Watson is comfortable and used to playing with as far as the system goes. When we saw the Browns actually make a leap forward with Joe Flacco with other quarterbacks, they ran some of the most 12 personnel out there. So two tight ends, two wide receivers, one running back.
Mm-hmm.
That to me says this is a big issue from a fantasy perspective because I think we're I think you can start connecting the dots to see the trend from last year before Deshaun Watson's injury to now this year. And I get it's one game, but there's a serious issue of can Watson lead that system that Stefanski has and make it work? And I think the answer right now is no, which then
No.
means if you've drafted Njoku, which I understand he has an ankle injury, so he's on the shelf for a few weeks anyway. But if you have a Mark Cooper, if you have a deep league, you have Jerry Judy, if you have Jerome Ford, If you drafted Deshaun Watson and said, I think he can do it, I think you have to be very concerned that I don't think it's going to
Yeah,
work.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I think you do too. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's the issue is you are concerned, and really the only saving grace of the Cleveland offense has been the running backs, fantasy wise. It's been Nick
yeah.
Chubb, is superhuman and doing what he does, and you're in this Jerome Ford, Nick Chubb situation with the running backs, and but yeah, with Deshaun Watson, you got to be concerned, and you have to feel like that Cleveland management feels like they have some kind of sunk cost with him, right? The $230 million guaranteed, right? That that Dak vested by $1 million with his guarantee on Sunday, but like you're looking at that and you're saying you have to think that because of the amount invested, they feel like they have to play him, even though the writing's on the wall that it's not working in the system, right? And we
Yep.
saw him with the Texans, top five fantasy quarterback with the Texans, fantastic quarterback both in real football and fantasy wise, and it hasn't worked in Cleveland. This is one where I don't think it's an overreaction. I think it really is a panic. Like the Browns have just not looked good since Deshaun Watson has been a part. They put together little mini win streaks when he's been injured,
Yep.
and was able to limp along towards the end of the season. But yeah, I mean you're right. Like I think you're valid in what you are seeing. I think that there should be concern if you're a fantasy owner, if you have Browns players. I mean, Amari Cooper with the Cowboys could have been the next CeeDee Lamb. Like he was heading that
Yeah.
direction, and they got traded. So and now no one talks about him. He's in the Brown system, and he's stuck in it, right? So I think very valid concerns with the Cleveland offense.
Yeah. And I think you're